Okay, hello, welcome. This is Mr. Peterson. We're going to do some ellipses today, and apologies in advance. I've had hiccups for the past hour or so. I've been waiting to film this lesson for them to go away. And speak of the devil, they actually seem to be gone. That is so awesome. Okay, hopefully those hiccups stay away for now because we're doing something very exciting. We are going to work on ellipses today. So, or ellipses. I think it's probably more proper to call them ellipses because I think ellipses are these dots that you write at the end of a sentence. Anyway, okay, so ellipses. Ellipses will help us to draw forms. And the better we are at drawing ellipses, pardon me, the more convincingly we will be able to draw these forms. Particularly, we will try to introduce a sense of perspective by how we draw these ellipses. So to do that, let's actually practice drawing an ellipse or two. So we did an exercise in class where we essentially do a couple circles above the page and then a circle or two on the page, a couple circles above the page, circle or two on the page. You know, you can do the same thing with ellipses. So you can just try a couple ellipses above the page and then on the page. And you can notice here that an ellipse is really just a circle that's kind of squished. I didn't mean to do this, but I've kind of drawn a face. That's funny. So here, an ellipse is really just a squished circle. And a circle starts with a C. There we go. Okay, so that's all an ellipse really is. But we're also going to need to talk about parts of an ellipse as well. And I'm not going to test you on these parts, but I will be referencing them during the lesson just for clarity's sake. So let's talk about these parts of an ellipse. We have two axes here. And these axes are perpendicular to each other. This will feel like math class just for a little bit. But let's investigate these two parts. You won't have to do any equations or anything like that. Okay, so there's two main parts to an ellipse. There is a major axis. I'll be referring to that. And there is also a minor axis. I will also be referring to that. Major, if something is a major deal, then it's probably a big deal. So major axis is bigger. It's the bigger of the two axes. A minor problem that you might have is a smaller problem. So the minor axis is the smaller axis. So here we can say that this longer axis from this end to this end is the major axis because it's bigger. And this axis from the top to bottom is the minor axis. So just a little bit of vocabulary there. And the major and minor axes, they don't necessarily need to be, the major axis isn't always necessarily horizontal, and the minor axis isn't always necessarily vertical. They will be for this lesson, but if you draw an ellipse like this, then it's clear that the major axis is now vertical and the minor or smaller axis is now horizontal. And neither of them need to be vertical or horizontal. You can draw an ellipse on a slant. And in this case, the major axis is diagonal and so is the minor axis. So it doesn't really matter which one is vertical and which one is horizontal. What matters is their sizes. So the major axis is always bigger, the minor axis is always smaller. Okay, so that's our little bit of vocabulary for today, or geometry, or whatever you want to call it. Now, what we're going to really focus on here is how we can change mostly the minor axis to create this sense of perspective in our objects. So let's just grab all of this junk here and just make it smaller, because I'm going to need some room. There we go. So I'll show you what I mean. So to create this sense of perspective, I'm going to draw a cylinder for you. And so this cylinder, it's going to have a top, which is an ellipse, and it's going to have a bottom, which is also an ellipse. And here, I'm drawing my cylinder. Sorry for the mouth noises if you heard that. Gross. So here I have two axes, a major axis and a minor axis, a major axis and a minor axis. And we can see that the minor axis, the smaller axis on this top ellipse, it's smaller than the minor axis on this bottom ellipse. So here we have a smaller minor axis, and here we have a larger minor axis. Again, it's not super important that you know these terms forever. I am just going to be referring to them a little bit during our lesson here. If you want an easier, less word or technical vocabulary heavy way to understand this, you can think of it this way. As we go down along the form, the ellipses get less squished. Right? So this ellipse on the bottom, it's a lot less squished than the ellipse on the top. Or you can think of it as you go from the bottom to the top, the ellipses get more squished. So you don't necessarily need that technical vocabulary that I'm referring to here. And let's just make sure that I have a small eraser here. And this creates a little bit of a sense of perspective. So let's actually connect this line here. So here, it's very, very subtle. But especially on your more complicated forms, it's gonna look a lot nicer to the eye if your bottom ellipses for your cylinders or any form that you have is less squished than your top ellipses. Okay, I'm going to show you how this works here. So if we look at this wine glass, it's not a cylinder, but it doesn't really matter. Every part of this wine glass is actually a circle, a perfect circle. But if we're looking at this wine glass at an angle, all of these perfect circles will turn into ellipses from our point of view, right? If we look top down, then everything is just going to look perfectly circular. But we're not looking top down, are we? We're looking at an angle. So when we're looking at this wine glass at an angle here, we can notice that the top ellipse is more squished than the middle ellipse, which is more squished than the bottom ellipse. So the minor axis on top is smallest, and then the minor axis here is larger in the middle, and it's largest on the bottom. So even though this wine glass tapers in kind of a funny way, or in other words, the major axes are changing all the time, right? This major axis is small, and then the major axis gets larger, and then the major axis gets small, and then the major axis is really, really small along the stem, and then the major axis is a different size here. What's really important to track is as we go down is the size of the minor axis. Or let's just call this the squishy axis, right? How squished these ellipses get. So again, we get less squished as we go down. You can notice the same thing here with this mug. right? We have this, again, if we're looking top down, then everything looks like circles. But we're not looking top down. We're looking at an angle, and when we're looking at an angle like this, the top ellipse is going to look less squished than the bottom ellipse. And again, what we're focused on here is this minor axis. Right here, the minor axis is small, and here the minor axis is larger. And if we get a good sense of control here, of making our ellipses less squished as we go down, then that's going to produce better drawings for us. So I'm going to stop this video here, and in the next video, we're going to try to draw just a coffee mug, just a plain coffee mug using these techniques.